So I didn't think I'd have a video this week because the video I was originally making was asking the question, is 8 gigabytes of RAM enough? And the testing required for that took way more time than I thought, so I didn't have a video this week. But now I do, because somehow, unbeknownst to me, Apple was planning and held a very small event. It wasn't even an event, it was just an announcement video talking about the new M2 Pro and M2 Max chips and the new Mac Mini and the new MacBook Pros, which look the same, but basically were just a platform for launching the M1 Pro, M2 Pro, and M2 Max. Not the M1 Pro, that's been out. I'm going to save my thoughts about the Mac Mini for last because I have quite a few of those. First, I want to talk about the chips themselves, the M2 Pro and the M2 Max. I have to get used to saying those now. So to no surprise, the M2 Pro and the M2 Max are improvements from the M1 Pro and M1 Max, just like the M2 is an improvement over the M1. You're going to see an average of 30 to 40% improvement in performance based on Apple's weird benchmarks. This is mostly in productivity tasks. The one thing that I did find interesting is that both of these new CPUs feature 4 efficiency cores. And as far as I recall, I'm pretty sure the 4 efficiency cores were exclusive to the M1 when it was out, and when the M1 Pro and M1 Max came out, they gave you more performance cores and cut back on the efficiency cores. I know they did for the M1 Max, because that's what I use on a daily basis, but I think they did it for the M1 Pro as well. That's what happens when you do most of your research and then go off script and think of one thing you didn't look up. Yep, so both the M1 Pro and M1 Max came with 6 or 8 high-performance cores, respectively, but both came with 2 high-efficiency cores, whereas now you have 4 high-efficiency cores on both chip types. This isn't a big deal. It's the thing I found most interesting, though, because one of the things that I observed when I was comparing my Mac Studio to my Mac Mini, which you can check out that video over there talking about the base model Mac Mini and how it's aged, is that the base model Mac Mini, when it came to day-to-day tasks, actually felt a little more performant, or at least a little snappier, than my M1 Max-equipped Mac Studio, because the high-efficiency cores on the Mac Studio are just cranked. You're running them at 60-70% utilization while you're doing day-to-day tasks, because there's only 2 of them to share the load, and macOS tends to like to push as much efficiency as it can. So if you're just browsing the web, it's going to the efficiency cores. Whereas the Mac Mini, you have 4 of those cores, so they would run, even in some more demanding stuff like video tasks. I'd watch a YouTube video, they'd be running at 30, 40% maybe, and generally for just scooting around the OS, you'd be looking at 20%. So having those extra efficiency cores ideally means that it's going to be a little bit more performant on the day-to-day, which, considering these chips are going into the MacBook Pros and the Mac Mini, means that the people who want a chip that can be very performant when it needs to be, but also be still snappy when it comes to day-to-day tasks, are probably going to get what they want. Granted, what I'm sure fewer people were asking for was a massive improvement to the graphics, where you have 19 graphics cores on the Pro and 38 graphics cores on the Max. That's cool. I hate the fact that Apple shows it off for gaming, and I also hate the fact that their benchmarks make no sense when comparing. They literally compared the raw processor performance of these chips to their last i9 MacBook Pro, which was, it was running a 4-year-old Intel chip. Like, it's not a fair comparison. Your chips can stand well enough on their own, and just compare them to the last generation. It's still an impressive improvement. Anyway, rant over. But either way, while it's dumb to show it off for gaming, the M2 Pro and the M2 Max having 19 and 38 graphics cores respectively is still really impressive, and the size comparison was hilarious, because sitting next to one another, they look huge one step after the other, but then you have Tim, I think was his name, holding one in his hand. That was pretty cool. Anyway, it's dumb to show these graphics cores off for gaming, because what a lot of people are going to be using these for is the tasks you showed immediately afterwards, like 3D rendering, or Final Cut, or DaVinci Resolve rendering. Those are the programs that are being optimized for this M platform, the Apple Silicon platform, and at least in my experience, DaVinci Resolve and Final Cut have no problem dumping tasks over to the graphics cores and making the most out of it. I don't even have the maximum number of graphics cores that were offered on the M1 Max, and it still flies. So I can only imagine 38 cores is going to be even faster. Also, with these new MacBook Pros, because of the improved efficiency, one of the things they talked about was the battery life. Now, I think the second thing they showed, which was sort of the corridor crew style challenge, where they put a bunch of creative professionals together and had them complete different tasks on battery, I think that was actually really cool. I would have been interested to see what the end battery life was when they finished. But at least showing off that they could complete these tasks on battery was impressive enough. Actually, I'll just call it impressive, not impressive enough, because impressive enough would be showing the end result, showing that you could do it on battery, then showing that you still had like 40% battery left after all of that. The reason I bring up that challenge video, though, is because I think that is a better representation of the extreme end of what those can do and how impressive the battery life is, instead of just putting 22 hours of battery life, because I guarantee you that's based off of video being played back on the screen, which is a viable test for one very basic function, playing perfectly encoded H.265 footage off of the storage. But yeah, 22 hours of battery life, fine, whatever. Don't think that you're going to be doing a full Final Cut Pro render with 22 hours of battery life. You'll get 10, 12. The best I got with a Final Cut Pro render on an M1 Pro MacBook Pro 14-inch was about 12 hours. And that was just me using it for a render, not plugging it in, and just using it until the battery died. 12 hours. Still impressive, not 22. Don't call it 22 because nobody's just sitting around watching perfectly encoded H.265 video for 22 hours straight. Refreshing the MacBook Pros, though, was really just a way for Apple to introduce the new chips. There's no change externally to these computers. They still have the same great displays. They still have the, in my opinion, great design. It's just now we have the new processors. And they are impressive. The fact that we're seeing 30, 40% improvements in general tasks and heavy-duty tasks across the board, that's awesome. I'm really glad to see that my M1 Max has already been overshadowed within a year. I kind of say that sarcastically, but also it's nice to see that, you know, owning a 2016 MacBook Pro and having it be the fastest MacBook Pro on the market for 3 years straight isn't going to happen again. Because owning an i9 MacBook Pro and having it be the fastest MacBook Pro wasn't saying much when the fastest MacBook Pro was dog slow. Whereas now, my M1 Max is still fast. It's still very fast and performs super well, and now there's something above it, which means that Apple's not slowing down. However, now that we got the MacBook Pros out of the way, they look the same. Battery life is not actually 22 hours unless you watch video for 22 hours straight, and you have these really impressive processors under the hood. We're going to shift gears to the Mac Mini. Now, I'm going to put this right up front. I do not care that Apple still ships these computers with 8 gigabytes of RAM in the base model. In fact, the video that I was working on for this week was asking the question, is 8 gigabytes of RAM enough? And I'm not going to give away the results, but it comes down to way more than just the RAM. So I don't care that they still ship it with 8 gigabytes of RAM, because most people who are looking to spend $599 on a computer aren't going to care if it's got 8 gigabytes of RAM as long as it does what they need. And for me, I have an 8 gigabyte of RAM, 256 gigs of storage M1 Mac Mini base model that I bought for $599 that I plugged a ton of hard drives into, and it runs as a server and a video encoder because I don't need it to go cranking out my videos on a daily basis, but when I have an MKV file that needs to be put into something manageable, I throw it over there because time isn't really a factor. But moving away from RAM as quickly as possible, we also have the storage options, which are 256 and 512 on the M2 models. That's kind of weird. I don't know why they made the 512 a separate selectable option on the Buy Now page. You can literally select the base model and bump 256 to 512, and it costs the same, and it is the same. I couldn't tell if they did anything different with the graphics, because it looks like the graphics, the processor, everything's the same. So if somebody else knows why they did that, let me know in the comments. But either way, the new Mac Mini, which it literally looks the same, which we'll talk about in a minute, that new Mac Mini can now be configured with 8, 16, or 24 gigabytes of RAM. So if you don't believe that 8 gigabytes of RAM is enough for a basic computer, you can bump it up. And with Apple being Apple, you bump it up high enough, and, well, it's close enough or at the same price as the next option up. So the next option up is the M1 Pro. Damn it, M2 Pro. Yeah, aside from messing up the names, you can get an M2 Pro in the Mac Mini, which is cool because that means that Apple is finally acknowledging that people like me exist, people who want to buy a small, compact machine, not spend a ton of money on it, and still get decent performance. And that M2 Pro that M2 Pro configuration starts at 16 gigabytes of storage, starts at 512 gigs of storage, and starts at $12.99. It's a little higher in price, but for some people, it is going to be right in the price and performance bracket that they want without going and buying a Mac Studio. That's really cool, and honestly, if it was out when I was shopping around for the Mac Studio, I might have bought it instead. Also, opting for the M2 Pro version of the Mac Mini brings back the 4 Thunderbolt 4 ports that you used to have on the Intel version. That's super cool. That was one of the biggest things that I was sort of let down by when it came to the M1 model, is the lack of Thunderbolt ports. You only have 2 and 2 USBs. Obviously, it wasn't an issue for making it a server, but it was a bit of an issue when I was trying to use it on a daily basis as an editing machine. Which, yes, I used 8 gigabytes of RAM in a Mac Mini to run my channel for a little while, believe it or not. But that's it. That was the update for the Mac Mini, which is more frustrating than the MacBook Pro, because sure, these chips are really impressive, and I'm super glad to see them finally getting put into the Mac Mini, because the Mac Mini is the best cooled option for any of these chips aside from the Mac Studio. You have a desktop with a set fan speed and a massive, massive chassis to just blow air through. Not actually a massive chassis, but big in terms of cooling volume. But here's the thing. The MacBook Pros get a pass for not getting updated, because they were updated last year. The Mac Mini still has the same design that we've had since 2010. Let me say that again. The Mac Mini with the brand new M2 Pro and M2 processors, which are the pinnacle of Apple's current high-efficiency ARM-based performance chips, is in a chassis that is 13 years old. What the fuck? I can only really think of one new design decision that Apple's made recently that really pissed me off, which was the fact that you can use a 1st gen Apple Pencil with a 10th gen iPad, and you need a lightning to USB-C dongle cable thing to make it work. That pissed me off because it was new and made no sense because it was implementing something old. This just pisses me off because they're implementing something so new into a chassis that is so old. Look at all the concepts. If you literally Google Mac Mini concepts, these folks are designing such cool concepts that Apple wouldn't even have to really do anything design-wise. They could just steal somebody's homework and make a Mac Mini like that, and people would go nuts. I was actually really hyped for a potential rainbow of Mac Minis, but no, we just get the same chassis. It's not even space gray, it's still silver. Why? I am super hyped that the price didn't change for the Mac Mini. I am super hyped that they finally have a performance chip that supports a decent amount of memory for the high performance tasks while still offering a low enough amount of memory to keep the prices down. But just give us a new design. I have literally worked with this chassis for 12, 13 years now. It's ridiculous. I remember when they first redesigned this. I was in high school when this design came out, and I was blown away by it. 13 years later, it's old hat. It's not even the smallest thing performance-wise you could see on the market. I mean, it might be the smallest thing with the most performance you can see on the market per watt, if that's how Apple wants to measure it, but no. Apple, do better, please. Either way, to avoid going on a rant, I'm super happy to see that these chips are out now. We have the M2 Pro, the M2 Max. I'm sure Max Tech, Luke Miani, Talos of Tech, I'm sure they're all going to grab these chips and benchmark the snot out of them in an oven to make sure that they do overheat so they have something to write about. But super cool to see that these chips are out now. I'm glad to see that they are updating their computers regularly, which was something that we had a huge issue with back with the Intel chips. So, cool to see. Hope they don't iterate themselves into oblivion. Super pissed that the Mac Mini still looks the same way it did 13 years ago. MacBook Pros get a pass because they're only a year old. Either way, that's been it. Thank you all so much for watching. Let me know what you all think about the new chips down in the comments below. I'm actually kind of curious, so let me know. And again, subscribe for this stuff because I got a lot of things coming, including RAM tests. That'll be fun. It's taking so much time. But either way, hope you guys enjoy it. I'll see you on the next video. Make sure to be there and have a good one.